Hi guys, so I'm going to be taking you through this process of me making this charcuterie board I had custom made with this butcher block of piece of wood. It's pretty solid, it's pretty thick, it's 1.5 inches thick, it's about 19 inches long and about 16 inches wide. So as you can see, the first step I'm probably going to do is try to cut down that side of it to be able to make it as even as I can make it. So this step right here, what I had to do was pull out some clamps, attach it to the table because I needed to be able to kind of cut it down. And what I'm bringing out now is a jigsaw. I needed to take that out because I didn't need anything as precise as a table saw. It's just a little section in the middle of the wood that I needed to use to cut it off. So I just went ahead and took off that little piece of it. Super easy cut, nothing too difficult, just be able to put it away. Spoiler alert, that's not going to be the last time I'm going to use that jigsaw. And as you may have guessed it, the next step in the process of making this board was to sand the edges down, sand the sides, sand the top, bottom, left and right. You guys are probably wondering why this tape, what appears to be tape, is kind of on the edges. It was part of the wood. It was kind of just really adhesive to the board itself, so it was kind of hard to get off, peeling it off. So what I was doing is focusing a lot of time to be able to sand it down. And I spent so much time sanding the edge down where this little piece fell off.
Oh, wow. Well, that's nice. Damn it.
So what I had to do was bring out this table circular saw to be able to cut out the edges. Since I had dropped off that little piece of the edge, I had to cut down some of the width for it. So I went from 16 inches to 14 inches. So next up I went ahead and resanded the sides, be able to get everything smoothed out. Did the top, what I was starting off with, and the bottom I finished up as well. Next up, these measurements I'm taking are for lines I'm trying to make 1.5 inches inwards from each end. And what I'm trying to do is use this router to be able to make juice grooves for the board. And if you guys don't know what juice grooves are, they're meant for to be able to, if you're using it as like charcuterie board or a cutting board, anything you're slicing up that has any juice coming out of it, it will just kind of get stuck in those little grooves and it won't be dripping off the board itself. So it's a nice little feature to have, for sure. Make sure all that dust is thrown off of it. Next up, I added some tree designs to it. I have this stencil that have little like forest trees that my sister had given to me. So what I did is I went ahead and used it. It's part adhesive, so I was able to kind of line it up nicely on the board. This was a painstakingly long process. It was pretty tedious, so I just went ahead and sped this part of it up. The way that these trees were shading up nicely was coming out pretty cool. It's probably one of my favorite parts to do. It's just a lot of work, a lot of time to go into it. Next up, taking out the stain. I chose a somewhat medium dark stain. It wasn't going to make it super dark, but it does add a little bit of the color to the board itself. Since I sanded it down, it's a lot white, so you want to be able to make it look nice, make it give that little light brown, medium brown look to it. It's a good touch that I really am fond of when I'm working with wood projects like this. For this specifically, you have to be able to make sure the stain is covered in all spaces. You can't just kind of give it one coat. You got to make sure everything is covered evenly, so that way it soaks up when you're leaving like the board to be able to sit overnight. Here I'm just kind of messing around with the juice grooves, messing with the front face of the board. I'm going to be adding it to the sides. I'll be able to. I have this little piece of wood on the bottom right corner right there, so be able to kind of use it as a stand. So when I'm going to flip this over and be able to stain the back of it, I can kind of just let it sit there without touching the table. It's a pretty fun process. You're basically kind of painting with a little rag. And then go ahead and do the back as well. Like I said, make sure every single inch of that wood is covered up. Want to make sure all the little crevices, make sure everything's kind of evenly spread out. Nothing too wet, nothing too dry. Went ahead and flipped it and kind of just did a little bit of a finishing touch to it. Make sure every spot I thought was going to be covered needed to be covered. Yep, that step is done. So let this sit overnight. The next step I'm going to be doing is adding the food safe oil to be able to use the wood on the face of it, the board. I have to be able to add 3 coats of this. It's really helpful to be able to make it soak up, to make sure all the oils are soaked up into the board. You want to make sure you add that into it so that way you're able to use the board itself. Nothing of the stain is going to be seeping into anything you cut or use. Did 3 stains of that. Let it soak overnight as well. Next day, went ahead and checked it. Everything looks good. Now what I'm doing right here is I brought out a tape measure, making sure I measured the sides I wanted to use to be able to use the handles. And what I'm doing is I'm using little leather strips, and I'll be using little screws to be able to go into the wood, and going to be adjusting the size to be able to make sure you can fit your whole hand in there. You do want to make sure that you do drill into the wood and far enough so that way when you're tightening the screws like this, it doesn't give you any problems, because it does get pretty tight in there. Do the bottom side of the handle, make sure it's pretty tough, sturdy. Go ahead and finish it up, tightening it. This is the other side. Almost done with the process. Looks pretty good so far. And that's about it. And this is the finished result. Charcuterie board. Handles are pretty sturdy. I like the way it finished. I like the way it came out. It looks pretty nice. The way that the trees are kind of shining right there gives it a little bit of sheen. The color pops, making the board look pretty nice. Thanks for checking out my walkthrough. Hope you guys enjoyed this video.